just because that's how you've always done it, and just because that's the way you're taught, is not the way that it has to be. If it works for you, beautiful. Awesome. Let it continue to work. But you can't knock somebody that's causing you to think a little bit differently, because just the way in business and in life, just because you've always done it that way, doesn't mean that that's how it always has to be done that way.
You are best positioned to serve the person you once were. Hello, listener. I've changed up the intro a bit today, you may have noticed, by opening with a quote. The reason I've done that is that it's a quote that truly struck me from the conversation you're about to hear. Simon Sinek famously says, and indeed wrote a book entitled Start With Why. But today we'll be hearing why it should maybe be Start With Who instead, which is another thought that just has stuck in my brain. It's been living in my head from this discussion. And my guest today is the incredible Juan Alvarado. He is a US Amry veteran, a police veteran, spent over a decade working in non-profit expanded learning. And today he is a certified Gallup Strengths coach, a keynote speaker, a leadership trainer, and of course, a fellow podcaster too. And it's always great to have one of those on the show. Juan speaks to leadership teams and their staff to enhance team leadership and their staff engagement, helping them all to understand the importance of their intentional engagement with each other. And that word intentional is definitely a recurring theme today. He also uses his trials fighting through PTSD and shares how he has mended and strengthened his marriage, his relationship with his children, and how he now teaches intentional leadership to people across the world. And all of these many threads do tie together, and you just have to listen to find out how. Because at the end of this episode, you will understand why Juan is highly regarded as a speaker, why he's so relatable, motivational, and impactful. We'll be talking about all of that, as well as how he actually discovered Gallup Strengths in the first place, why he became a certified coach in it, and how he uses it to help leaders and much more besides. So stick around, you won't regret it.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Juan, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show today. Really looking forward to our conversation and hearing all your insights on leadership.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The pleasure's all mine.
Well, let's dive right in, and I'll hand over to you really to kick us off, to introduce yourself to listeners. Tell us a bit about your career so far, your background, what you get up to today, and what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, so this goes back quite a bit now that I think about it. So I'm a US Army veteran. I was deployed in Operation Iraqi Freedom with the United States Army, and did that for a little over 9.5 years, so 10 years, we'll call it. I was a police officer for 2 years before I stepped down and away from that stuff. And it was just like, hey, I want to work more with what I felt was youth. So I got into youth development and started working with the youth in the community that I live in, that I used to live in, and became a staff for a nonprofit. And then I moved up my way to a site lead. So I oversaw a single school, and then moved my way up to 2 schools. And then I became the manager a year later, did the management position for another year before I became the director. And I changed the way we hired. I changed the way we did training. I changed the way we did recognition, and just fully got engulfed in leadership. And I got a little big-headed with it and kind of slacked off a little bit, and was like, hey, let things run the way they run. And 1 year out of 100 staff, I had 170 staff. I had about 90 to 95% really good evaluations. The rest were mediocre, but one was really bad. And that one really bad one it didn't sit right with me. And so my boss was like, you have all of these phenomenal, like you're going to get a raise because of how great of a leadership and how much change you've brought, positive change. Like, don't get bent out of shape for this one. But it just kept on eating at me and eating at me and eating at me. And so I wanted to see how I could get better. And so then I did some research and I started looking at some assessments that I've taken before, Myers-Briggs assessments, the DISC assessment, and I wanted to try something new. So then I found the Gallup Strengths assessment, or Clifton Strengths, and I took that, fell in love with it, dove completely into that. And then I found out like a month or two later that you could become a coach. So I went through Gallup certification program and I became a Gallup certified coach and started to train my staff in the strengths, and then got even more, improvement in our organization. And so that's kind of where I am now. Left the nonprofit that I worked for. And now I go into other nonprofits and other organizations to help them with intentional leadership, how to combat complacency, and just how to grow leaders with intentionality so that they can pour into their staff. And so we go over, intentional leadership. We go over kind of shifting people from just regular quote unquote leadership to servant leadership to then stewardship. How do you steward your position? And so, yeah, I travel all over the United States doing that. I have some one-on-one clients. I have some school districts that bring me in to talk to their administration. And yeah, I'm traveling every day next week. I'll be gone for about a week and a half doing this and speaking at different conferences and organizations. So that's kind of where we are today.
Quite a journey then. It's military to the police, I think, especially in your neck of the woods, that's a pretty common career path. But then from there to non-profit and this kind of education world as well, that's quite a big jump, I would expect. What was it that kind of motivated that? Yeah.
So it was a big jump, and my parents have always been in my life. I've had a pretty good upbringing. Both my parents were loving. They were present, but they weren't always present. I remember like in high school, like going and wrestling or baseball and not seeing them in the stands and wondering where they were. And, dad was working, mom was working. And so they were present, but they weren't always present. We never had those real, touchy-feely conversations and things like that. And so, the reason why I say that is when I made that transition, my dad was one of the ones that gave me the biggest slack for it. He told me that I was committing financial suicide, right? Because, it's just 10 more years and you can retire with the military. And, you're leaving the police department roughly making about $50 to $60 an hour, 401k, retirement, medical stuff, to go work for a nonprofit. And you remember him saying, like, why they call it a nonprofit? Because you don't profit. Like you're not going to make anything from it. And so, I got a lot of slack from it. When you say and ask, what was the motivation behind it? One thing that I haven't mentioned yet, and if your listeners are on board, cool. If they're not on board with it, just understand that this is my story, not your story, and I'm not forcing anything on you, but I'm a man of faith, and I really felt that God was pushing me in a different direction. And so I was just, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And so I had a mentor of mine say, hey, there's a story in the Bible where Peter sees Jesus on the water and says, if you're really who you are, help me to step out of the side of the boat. And he's like, that message and that story was for Peter, not for the other men on the boat. People aren't going to understand your story. People aren't going to agree with you. People don't see what you see. But if this is the message that is for you, then don't worry about anybody else and just do it. And I just took a literal step of faith. And my dad was like, what do you have? What other doors open? I'm like, nothing. I don't know what tomorrow holds. And he's like, wait a minute, you're going to quit the very thing that's putting food on your table and you have nothing to go to. And I'm like, and that's where faith steps in. And so I didn't have nothing for 3 months. My wife, Trooper, right? We already had a son who was about 9 months old. He was a little over a year, and she's pregnant with our second. And my dad was like, you are going to bury yourselves seriously. And so my wife, pregnant and all, got a second job while I was trying to figure things out. And then in 3 months landed that nonprofit position and, started to go from there. And so I always knew in my heart that I was supposed to help what I thought was youth, which it was. I was helping junior high youth at the time. But then the leadership piece, when I became the manager and the director, became the leadership over the staff. And of course, I kept on getting older, but the staff stayed the same, if you will, because a lot of the staff that would come in would be college age staff, first jobs, second jobs, pay for schooling. They would go to school in the day, work for us in the afternoon. And so the demographic of that staff was 18 to about 25. So as I was getting older, right, people would come and go. The demographic was still 18 to 25. And so, as I got older, I was like, I'm helping adult youth, if you will, with their jobs and their leadership, which was cool because in the back end of it, now that I think about it, all those 18, 19, 20-year-old at the time are now school counselors, principals, young, successful principals. Some of them are teachers and now veteran teachers. Some of them have done other things, gone on to engineering degrees and things like that. But I've helped pave the way for their leadership. So yeah, it was just something that was on my heart.
It's made me chuckle a little bit as you were talking about the generation staying the same while you kept getting older. And it reminded me of quite a similar situation. And that there's that point of reflection, isn't there, where you realise the staff, the first one is like they were still in school when I was doing their job. And then the next one is they hadn't even started school. And then after that is they weren't even born. And that's when you start to feel really old. And but yeah, it's so true. And speaking of the generational difference, that conversation with your dad, again, my dad, quite a similar view when I went out to become a solopreneur and own my own business. He didn't actively discourage me, but he spent his whole career, 40 plus years working for the same company. He still works for them now, even though he technically was retired. Talking the other day, and he said to me that, he could never do that. He could never do a role where the income was uncertain, where it's all peaks and troughs all the time and all that. He always has to know where his next paycheck is coming from. Do you think it is a generational difference, or is it more just a sign that the workplace is changing, or is it both?
Yeah, it's here's what I see. I see that your father and my father were probably the strongest men that we knew, right? And strongest in that time frame. But if you put your dad or my dad now in today's world where they were at their, let's say, prime, it takes a different strength. The world is completely different, right? And so it takes a different type of strength. Like I told my dad, like he's a man of faith too, but I'm like, this is where I'm stronger than you. My faith is way stronger than your faith right now, because you have to say, like one of his statements was, God will not close a door without opening up another one. And I'm like, that's not faith. That's not faith. That's saying like, I'm going to jump off this building and there's going to be people under there. I already know it because I can see it and because I know it. Let me just do it. Well, that's not faith. That's absolutely knowing, right? Without an absolute doubt. Faith is, I don't know what's around the corner, but I'm going to do it anyways. And so, I'm way stronger than my father differently. He was way stronger. Like I couldn't survive in his time frame. And here's probably even proof. He was a migrant from Mexico, came to the United States, and went through the process the way he was supposed to and became a citizen and things like that. But him and my mother worked the fields and picked cotton and strawberries, nectarines, stone fruits, if you will, up and down California, Washington, and Oregon. I tried to pay homage to my parents, and one summer tried to go pick grapes. And my uncle had a farm and some land, and I helped him one year. It lasted about a half a day before I was in tears, hurting. I'm like, how did you do this at like 9, 10 years old and get paid cents, literally cents, pennies for each row? They would work all day and make like $1.50, if that. And it's like, I couldn't even do that. So his strength so it's a generational thing. I think it's a different strength thing, but yeah, my dad's like, how do you do the entrepreneurship thing? Like I travel and speak, and there's times where I don't speak and I don't make any money. And there's times where I speak every day for 2-3 weeks straight and make a grip ton of money. But I don't know what tomorrow holds. And it's just a different strength. It's a different type of leadership because our world is different.
I didn't really ask about the timing of this in terms of where it sits in relation to COVID and the Great Resignation and things like that. I'm guessing it was a few years before, but that might be unfair.
So all of the leadership stuff happened prior to COVID. However, when I left my nonprofit, it was October 2020. So as people were coming back little by little, was when I left. And honestly, I was actually speaking was a side hustle. So I was doing a lot of virtual stuff, and it turned my income started to surpass my regular 9 to 5. And so then we split apart because, and for some differences there, I wanted to make some different changes and stuff. And they said no. And I was like, hey, look at the track record. No. And I'm like, well, the side hustle in speaking is starting to catch up to y'all's pay. And if I can't make these changes or I can't do these things and have the successes that I've been having, then I'm going to make these successes happen for other organizations. And that's what we're doing. So,
and I mean, the assumption is when people go and pursue the side hustle or they turn it into their full-time job, they go for that purpose-led, whatever it is, whether it's their own business or a different job, that they end up happier. Is that an assumption or is that fair?
No, I think that's fair. I think I would have stayed with the nonprofit if the purpose, the intentionality, and the name of the podcast, right? The integrity was there. But once those things didn't align anymore, then it was like, okay, like I truly feel that everybody's true happiness is outside of yourself. You can't make yourself quote unquote happy. Happiness usually comes from everything external. Like I shouldn't find happiness, and I know this might get maybe a little bit controversial for some people, but like I can't put all my happiness in my wife, right? People are like, oh, the day I met you, I was so much more happier. Well, yeah, your happiness grows because of significant other, kids, maybe a raise or whatever, but that's not true happiness. That's the difference in what you want now compared to what you want later. But I can't put all my happiness in someone, because once that person's gone, passes away, leaves, whatever, then you're saying that I can no longer be happy. So there's some stigma, if you will, in happiness being external. What I mean by that is our purpose is always external, right? So I want to lose weight, right? And so I go to the gym, but it's the discipline that brings me happiness. It's maybe the visual results that I'm seeing. It's I have better cardiovascular, like it's all these things outside of kind of like who I am, if that makes sense. And so when we can get alignment in the thing that I love to do, the thing that I'm passionate about, we start to get that happiness. A mentor of mine, Rory Vaden, says, you are most powerfully positioned to serve the person who you once were. So when you look at the leadership piece of that I do, I'm serving the 8, 10, 15-year-old Juan, 18-year-old Juan. Like if you look at the people in the school system that kind of mess with my thought process, my father, my mother, the police department, everything growing up that kind of shook my world, I was let down by the leadership that was in front of me. So why do I do what I do? What's my purpose? Is to help those people have really good leaders and become really good leaders. I'm best positioned to serve the person who I once was. And so and to me, that's purpose. That's outside of me, right? And so when you find people who give to the elderly, to the homeless, or, help nonprofit, whatever it is, right? It's outside of yourself. And so that's where I find the true purpose brings happiness. Yeah.
I like that. It's a good way of putting it. And it reminds me of, and I'm a bit of a cynic on this one, but the whole money doesn't buy happiness debate. So I think it is a debate still. It's like, yeah sure. Money itself doesn't, but it does kind of help, doesn't it? Like if you don't
does.
Have it.
Yeah, for sure. There's a comedian, Daniel Tosh. He's very, very controversial, but he says, have you ever seen a sad person on a boat or on a sea-doo? Like, he's like, no, they're smiling from ear to ear. But yeah, in those moments, yeah, total happiness, right? You get a raise, happy. right? You're spending the money in your head already, right? All the things I can do. But here's the thing. It's all forward looking. I got a raise. Oh, we can go on this vacation. We can do this outside of you, in front of you, right? So when you really look at it, it's like, I need to start living for things that are just bigger than myself. How do I serve my sons, right? I have 3 boys. How do I serve my son? How do I serve my wife? How do I serve my community? And that's honestly where the true happiness is. Does money buy happiness or bring happiness? Absolutely. But happiness and true happiness are 2 different things.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I think it doesn't buy happiness as a commodity, certainly, but it's right. What you said. It enables you to do things, and the things, whatever they are, those are the things that will contribute towards your happiness.
Right.
And it is I agree with you. It's a whole big picture, isn't it? It's not just that one thing, right, whatever that may be. I think that's probably a healthier way of looking at it as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a bit more about leadership then, because that's why we're here after all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested to hear more about the Gallup Strengths process. For a lot of the listeners may not have heard of that. I think most people have probably heard of Myers-Briggs, or they've done it if they didn't know what it was called at least.
Yeah.
But tell us more about it. How do you use it, and how does it help?
Yeah. So the Myers-Briggs, all those assessments are really good. Myers-Briggs, DISC, there's numbers, there's colors, there's all kinds of different things. But what Don Clifton, the creator of Strengths, did was he's like, it's missing something. Like there's just a level of something that it's missing. And one of my Myers-Briggs things, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but there's 4 letters, like TIJ, whatever, right? And basically it says, and I always use this example, David has glasses, Juan has glasses, and because you both have glasses and because you're both males, or you're both TJI, whatever, you guys must go through this issue or handle this issue the same way. And Strength says, no, it's completely different, right? And so basically, Strengths is, Don Clifton says there's 34 strengths in all of us, but you utilize 5, they're called your top 5, more than the rest of them. It's almost like your hands, if you will, or you use your hands or your thumbs way more than you think you do. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried this experiment of try to tie your thumb down, and then you realize how much you need your thumbs, right? So it's second nature, right, to use these strengths, and you utilize 6 through 10 and some of these other ones. But 5 is I call it like your Batman, and then your 6 through 10 or 12 is like your Robin, right? You still use it. You still need assistance. But here's the cool part is the likelihood of my top 5 being in the same order and the same ones as your top 5 is 1 in 33 million. With Myers-Briggs, you have 4 different categories you can be in. In DISC, you have high D, low D, high I, low I. So there's 6 different combinations. Not with Strengths, right? And so my wife has a strength called relator, and so do I. How she connects with people is different the way I connect with people, but yet we have the same strength. And if you read it, my definition of it and her definition of it, it reads completely different. So it just goes to show you how unique you are as a person. And so Gallup Strengths, it gives you your strengths, and then another part of it is it shows you your weaknesses. And so, and I hate to say weaknesses. Let me take that back. They call it blind spots. It shows you your blind spots. And how I explain blind spots is it's you getting in the way of you. So let me run you through real quick the relator strength. The relator strength says, I make deep, meaningful relationships with other people. But here's the blind spot to it. People outside of that don't have a deep, meaningful relationship with you think that you have favorites. And it's not that you have favorites. It's just that you like being with the people who have cracked through that shell, that outer ring, who's in your inner circle, that deep, meaningful relationship. And those people could be in there too, but you might need them to say, hey, hello, how's it going? And then start to conversate and have a conversation and find the similarities. And then that circle opens up and then it allows you in. But they'll never go and try to push that because you look put offish. But those people that you have a deep, meaningful relationship with will talk to those people and say, you don't even know one. Like, he will die for you. You have no idea. Like, he is one amazing person. Like, well, how in the heck do you see that? I had somebody open for me the other day when I was speaking, and they said, and it kind of speaks to this strength, I hated one so much that I was on his panel when he was becoming the director. And my job was I volunteered to be on his hiring panel so that I can say no. I did not want him to be our director. And she says, and lo and behold, when I heard his interview, he started to win me over. I got to know him. I went under his wing. I asked for mentorship, and he is one heck of a leader that I still have to this day. And we've known each other for 10 years now. And to know that she hated me for 3, and in a couple different meetings, she was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea who truly this guy was. And we still talk to this day. And I still mentor her, and she's a great friend now. But it just goes to show you that we get in the way of ourselves. It's like we cast a shadow on great lighting that's a strength, but yet others can't see it. And so your strength can also have a blind spot. And so Gallup does a really good job of, hey, how do I communicate with you? How do I communicate with, with David? And so if I know your strengths and I know my strengths, then I can start to say, okay, I'm not going to ask David this way. I'm going to ask this way, because I need to fill his cup up first, and I need him to understand. So there's somebody that I work with that has a strength called context. And so they need this full-fledged information, like background information. How do we get to this point? And for me, it's like, if you talk to me about some background, just get to the point. Don't give me, talk to me. I don't need a 10-minute conversation to say I need this by 5 o'clock. Just say, hey, all that work you got, give it to me at 5 o'clock. But somebody with context is going to say, give me this whole background story because I need it so that I can be successful. So when I talk to somebody that has that strength context, I know how to talk to them, right? And so it's just really cool in how it allows me to intentionally speak, motivate, lift up, or even recognize somebody. And it's not just in the workplace. All my boys have taken this assessment, and my wife has taken the assessment, and it's helped us become way closer as a family because we speak into each other's strengths.
Well, it's hard to argue with that, isn't it? It clearly works. So I've traditionally always been quite against these kind of, and it's going to be a very pejorative and unfair way of referring to them, but personality tests.
Right.
I think partly because of how I've seen them used in the workplace. It's quite often kind of the last-ditch panic attempt. We know there's a problem. We'll have an away day. Everyone will sit around the table and do the test. And then we'll make everyone stand on a big circle so we can all see where we are in relation to each other. And I was quite often stood by myself at one part of the circle looking at everyone else. So yeah, it's kind of ingrained in me that I don't really like them. But,
see, and I was going to say, not to cut you off, but
no, go on.
with this assessment or that thing, they're looking at one area. Right? They're looking at one area, and that's the one that bothers me about all these other ones is so to go a little bit further in strengths, there's 4 what you call themes: strategic thinking, influencing, relationship building, and executing. And so you might be singled out over there, but you might have a strength that is the same as somebody else out of your top 5 or even out of your top 10. You might have one that is the same with maybe one other person. And now we go, oh, this is how we're similar. This is how we do things. But when you do those other ones, yeah, I've seen it. Everyone that's like this, come over here. And there's that one person out of 4 different things that you can do. But with strengths, it's like, oh, now I get it. And so we might share the same strength, or we might share a strength inside one of those 4 themes. And now we have a completely different conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and to be fair to the facilitator on that particular example, he was at great pains to say, look, this is really valuable. There's only one person in your company with that particular skill set. But it didn't feel that way when literally the entire company is standing opposite you.
Right.
However, I think where I've always seen that they can have a use is not in that context, but for your own self-development and understanding yourself and how you best work, which I've not seen them use that way in a business setting, or at least not when I was an employee.
Well, and here's the thing too with strengths is they have what they call a team grid. And so they put this grid up with everybody's strengths, and they'll tell the organization, like, you guys are really good in executing and really good in strategic thinking, but you might not have a whole lot of people in relationship building, or you have these 2 or 3 people in relationship building. These are the people that need to welcome new hires. These are the people who need to. So then you have a specific job in how that growth is. So there's a team grid, 1, but then 2, they've developed now the strengths so they have the regular strengths assessment, and they have one for students, but then they have one for people in sales. They have one for managers, and they have one for people who are in leadership or want to build their leadership. So it's very, very much a team dynamic thing to do.
Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And then the other question I was going to ask you about it is, how does it cope with context? Because something else that I've seen and experienced myself as well is the way you answer certain questions on these tests might change depending on the context of where you are at the time, or whether you're doing it for work or for personal development and so on. So yeah, how does it cope with that?
Yeah. So the way that the questions go is there's a phrase and then answers on two different sides. And so you have an answer all the way to the left, middle, to the right, but you also have answers in the middle of those. So far left, middle, right, right. And so one of the questions might be, when you go into a party, do you or I, and then one side says, go straight for the people that I already know, or mingle and make new friends? And so I'm like, find the people, like, forget mingling. I hate networking. I hate talking to people I don't know, which is the relator piece. Like, I want to find those people who I already know. And if I get introduced by somebody I know and I trust, and we have something in common, then you've kind of started to go into that inner circle, which is funny because it speaks directly to that, what that strength is. And so then I'm going to pick something, all the way over to the left. When it says, like, there might be a question that says, when I get recognized for something that I did good, I like public praise. I like private praise. I'm okay with either one, neutral, middle, right? Somebody might say, nope, I'm all the way over here, or lean more this way. And so it does give you the opportunity to answer in a way that's not, because some of those questions on some of those other ones, they're so black and white. It's like, do you handle, when you get angry, do you get mad and hit things, or do you show the frustration on your face? And it's like, maybe I just stay quiet and I don't do any of those. But now I'm forced to pick something. And so that's why I don't like those other ones. The other thing with the strengths is Don Clifton went to look at pretty much every occupation in every country, from, a janitor all the way up to a CEO and president, found out why are people successful in all of those, in different positions. Like, there's different forms of success. And then there's people who are highly successful, but you can be highly successful as a custodian. I have a buddy who was really highly successful as a custodian and then started his own custodial business. And now he owns all these different trucks and all these different things, and he's highly successful. So basically what Don Clifton did was say, why are all these people, men or women, or age from this age to this age, why are they so highly successful? And he found that all of them had these 34 strengths. And so it just goes, the study behind it is done really well. So it's not necessarily a personality assessment, if you will. It's more of a strengths assessment. What makes you strong and why?
I can see clear value there from a leadership perspective, both for knowing yourself, but also the bit that so many managers in particular struggle with, which is knowing and understanding your team and the way that they best work. And you've given a couple of examples there already that I think are quite pertinent, but knowing how people want to receive feedback, for example, because a lot of leadership theory would suggest the best way to do that is you praise in public and reprimand in private. And that's been the standard for ages, right? But actually, for a lot of people, that could be really embarrassing. They might be hugely introverted. They don't want to be praised in public. They just want someone to quietly, as part of building that relationship, just say to them, that was a really good job. Well done. Thanks for that. And that's all they want.
Yeah. And usually when I talk about recognition, I talk about 3 letters, TSI. Timely, specific, and individualized, right? So don't wait for your yearly evaluation to go tell somebody that they did a really good job. Don't wait until in 2 weeks we have our Christmas party. I'll tell them then. Do it now. Do it now. Like, it needs to be done sooner than later. Specific is be specific. Stop saying good job, right? Because if I was to tell you after this, hey, good job on the podcast, what does that even mean? hey, the way you answered those questions, or you allowed me to kind of interrupt and speak freely, asking me questions I've never gotten before, like you did a really good job in that. Like you made me feel comfortable. Way different and specific than good job, right? So be specific. And then individualized. Individualized is, and I don't know where it's like where you're from, but there's always two things that people get recognized with. Like, hey, here's for you and your department, here's a pizza party, right? Or here's a Starbucks gift card. And I'm like, stop giving Starbucks gift cards. I would get tens, if not hundreds of Starbucks cards for doing a good job. And I do not drink coffee. So why are you going to give me a reward with something that I don't do? It's like me giving, and I don't hope I'm not offending anybody when I say this, but it's like me giving a woman a tie for her birthday. What the hell is she going to do with a tie? Unless she wears suits. And more often than not, a woman's not going to wear a 3-piece suit with a tie. So why am I going to give her a tie, right? Like, give her something that she's going to use. Give me something I'm going to use. Like, if you would have just asked, hey, do you like coffee? No. What would you rather have? Give me a Jamba Juice card, a smoothie, something like that. I like books. Give me a book, whatever it is. But the Starbucks card is not it, right? So the individualized part is, like I tell HR departments, like have a piece of paper that is an onboarding piece that says, this is my favorite drink. This is where I like to shop. This is my favorite candy bar. This is my favorite flavor of this. So that when you go get somebody, maybe they do like Starbucks, but now I'm going to give you your triple mocha, upside down, no latte, froth, blah, 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 whatever that specific drink is. If they were to write it down, how much more individualized and special does that person feel when I give them the exact drink that they like than a generic gift card? The other part of individualized is, do you like public praise or do you like private praise? And some people will say, I don't care. Some people say, if you bring me up on stage, I will quit where you and smack you where you stand. Like, don't ever do that to me. So yeah, think TSI.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure about the individualized bit for this, but I think that's really powerful for any type of feedback, not just for the praise aspect of it. I guess for the individualized bit, if it's more down the constructive feedback route, maybe it's more about how you deliver it in a way that is going to be received well and acted upon and they feel supported as opposed to victimized.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think certainly the timely thing when it comes to any sort of feedback, good or bad, because if something's gone wrong and you leave it till next year's appraisal, it's too late to do anything about it and you've probably forgotten by then anyway.
Right. And it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Hey, what you did in January, remember that conversation we had back in January? Like, no, I barely remember what I did 5 minutes ago. Right. So it's the timely thing is huge. Mm-hmm. Because we're quick to tell you what you did wrong. I can tell you what you did wrong right away. So
but this is what I'm saying. I think quite a lot of people shy away from it, whether it's what you did wrong as well. I think it's quite easy to sort of just store up these little collection of things, grievances almost, that you then bring up at your next appraisal. And yeah, anyway, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. And here's the big thing that makes it full circle. Why aren't you comfortable with bringing things up? And that could be a blind spot in your strengths. Like there's some people, my wife for existence, she's got a strength called positivity and harmony. The blind spot to that is, I don't want any trouble. We're just going to sweep this under the rug real quick. And I just don't want any issues. So it's better to stay quiet than it is to bring it up. But positivity and harmony, like you would think, I would love to have those strengths to be, all positive all the time and stuff. And the other blind spot to some of that is like, let me just be angry. Like if I'm upset, I don't need to hear, it'll be okay. And you're good, pal. Like everything's all right. And, everything happens for a reason. It's like anger is okay. Being upset and frustrated is okay. How we get that anger or frustration, how we deliver that might be an issue and a problem. But sometimes it's okay to be upset. That's part of the emotions that we're allowed to have as human beings. And if you need time, cool, go take time. Take a walk, close the door to your office. You want to take my office? You don't have an office? Come into my office, sit down. Don't break my computer, but cool off in here, right? I'm okay with that. But we have to allow people to process. And sometimes the downside to that strength is like, it's okay for people to be upset. I don't need to be gumdrops and lollipops all day long. And I don't need you telling me to cheer up. Not right now. Maybe in 5 minutes from now, but let me. And so, yeah. But digging down into why aren't you comfortable with talking about it? You might figure that out in your strengths.
Sometimes those, we paint a lot of these emotions as negative, but I think sometimes they do serve a purpose. They are there, as you say, because it's how we process things that have happened. And if you try to deny that process or short circuit it or just like skip to being happy again, it can be actually quite toxic doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the most frustrating people I've ever worked for was the one who was just relentlessly optimistic about everything. Even when like the house was literally falling down around us, he was like, how is everyone? What a great day it is. And maybe he thought that was helping and that he was going to turn things around with his positive attitude. But sometimes it can be quite frustrating to work with.
Yeah. And because you aren't present, right? 4 things that it says that employees all want from their boss is honesty, competency, forward-looking, and inspiration. But competency, knowing what you're doing, is also knowing what you're doing in the midst of what's happening. And if you're oblivious to what's going on and you don't want to ask, hey, the stuff's going on here, how are you feeling? Like I tell people, ask, not, hey, how's it going? Or, hey, how you doing? Slow it down and put some emphasis on the you part. Mm-hmm. Hey, David, things are kind of crazy today. I have one question before we get started, and we have all the time in the world to talk about it. How are you doing? Completely different. Because when we say, hey, how's it going? It just comes off as a rhetorical question.
Yeah, because it is usually.
Right. But and that's the reason why I teach on intentionality and making sure that our leaders are intentional, is like, just put the intentionality behind it and it'll take you so much further.
Nobody wants that sort of the tone deaf approach, do they? In whatever the context, really.
Right.
You want to feel seen, you want to feel listened to. And if your leader's not giving you that, then most of us are going to go and find another one that will.
Yeah. Acknowledgement and recognition are the 2 things that people want. I want to be heard and I want to be seen. So every day that you go into your job, your work, how do I make people heard and how do I make people seen? That's my job.
On the subject of difficult people, they do occasionally happen. A lot of the time, it might just be the way you perceive it, and they probably don't realize they're being difficult. But if there is a challenging working relationship, what would you say is the best way to handle that?
Yeah, I'm going right back to strengths. So I dealt with an employee, a boss. This gentleman was in charge of a department, and he knows that he's an issue and a problem, and everybody else knows that he's an issue and a problem. He's like, hey, I do really good work. Everybody knows it. It's my way or the highway. And if you don't like it, too bad. Like, look at my track record. Everything that needs to be fixed, I get it done faster than you need it done, better than you need it done. Check the track record. My employees, I have a high standard. If they don't like it, too bad, we'll find somebody else. People are dying to come work for our department because we pay good stuff, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, how do we pull the reins back a little bit on them? And so his issue with 2 or 3 staff, and then I looked at his issue with his uppers, and I looked at his uppers' problems with him, and we went right back to strengths. And I just got an email back from him, and I can share this with you and screenshot it to you so you can see it. And he was like, that 101 that you had with me was phenomenal. The changes that were made to my strengths, understanding my strengths and understanding my staff strengths, it was completely different. So then I talked to his boss who hired me, and she says, he did something. I said, hey, how has he been doing? And she says, he did something that he's never done before. He brought in his barbecue and barbecued everybody lunch and dinner, which he has never done in the 15 years that he's been here. And some of the greatest conversations that we saw happen with the people that he has issues and problems with. Like, what the heck happened in that room? And I said, I was real, I was upfront, and I did not hold back. And we went into strengths and stuff like that. So I would go back to strengths, because if someone's upset, I want to know why. And sometimes strengths can show that. And so I found out through him looking at his strengths, as big and burly as the dude is, he's a big, and I mean this with all due respect, he's a big baby. And what I mean by that is he needs nurturing and he needs love, which is crazy. Like there's a saying that says, hey, check on your strong friends, because even the strongest people have really bad, horrible days. Even though you think we're strong, like we do this in the workplace. Let me go check in on this person and this person because I know that they need it. I'm not going to worry about so-and-so because they're our A player. And sometimes that A player feels like an F- and they're doing horrible, but we don't check on them because we automatically assume, again, going back to intentionality, check in on everyone, right? So his whole thing is they know that my work is good. They always compliment my work. This was huge for me listening to him, hear him speak. Everyone compliments the work, but they never compliment me. Everybody looks and recognizes the work, but they don't recognize me. And I'm like, this big dude is wanting recognition. We go right back. I want to be seen and heard. And all he wants recognition from his boss, but he gets it from everywhere else. And I had to tell him, you're getting it from your employees. That should be what you want. But he wants it from the 1 or 2 people above him. I'm like, but you're getting it from 36 other people. And he's like, I want it from these 2, right? With me being upset and frustrated at work with my boss, I got it from my 170 staff, but I never got it from him. Right. So I want to understand if this person's being disgruntled, if this person's upset and they're being a problem child, why? Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we can look at your strengths and say, oh, I tell people to picture this. Picture 5 of your faces, right? 5 of your faces. And each face has your strength. Like for me, it's strategic thinking, responsibility, relator, achiever, and activator. Those are my top 5. And anytime I'm upset, it's almost like somebody disrespecting me and smacking one of those faces or one of those strengths. And so again, I know that I talk too much, but quick story. We were giving everybody raises at where I used to work and printed all the checks out on the stub, wrote personalized notes to 170 people, different notes. Took me almost all day. Sealed up the envelopes, hopped in our company car to go take them. And our CEO goes, no, hold on. Don't go just yet. Do we want to do this now or do we want to do it next week? I'm like, I spent too much time on this. Let's do this. My activator and achiever strength says, I want to do it now. And I'll work till the wee hours of the morning to deliver these to them. And he said, let's just wait until next week. Next week came, he went on vacation. We never did it. And then he had an employee upset saying, hey, I think I deserve more money. He's like, you should have gotten a raise. And she's like, no, Juan, what happened with those checks? I'm like, you told us to wait. And we're sitting on him. He's like, no, I didn't. I'm like, yes. And everybody in the office is like, yes, we waited. They're all there. They're actually sitting on your desk because you said to wait. So I was so upset for that whole month, really ticked off. Never said hi to my boss when he came in because I'm like, dude, you are ruining the lives of 170 people and me included. But when we look at strengths, my activator strength that says, I want to do it now and work now was being offended. My relationship with 170 people was being demoted, if you will, to those people. So long story long, and where do we go first? I would automatically go to strengths. Second part that I go to is hear the person out. I need to have those regular conversations with my staff and I want to hear them.
Absolutely. And it's a good story that makes the point really well. So yeah, no worries. What has been your own best experience of being led?
My best experience of being led. Let's see. Great question. I would say one of my keynotes that I'm actually going to be doing, I was led to this. I was led to this epiphany or this thought process by someone not in a leadership position. It was my 5-year-old at the time son, Levi, who asked me the question of, Daddy, are you a boss? And I said, yes, Daddy's a boss. And he's like, are you the boss of me and Lincoln? And I said, yes, Daddy's the boss of you and Lincoln. Mind you, this is 8:30 at night. It's time to go to bed. This is what every other kid says, like, I'm thirsty. Can I have some water? Can you read me a bedtime story? Levi was trying to ask questions. And are you the boss here? You boss there? Yes. And then he's like, is mommy a boss? And I'm like, yes, go to bed. And he's like, is mommy the boss of you? And I'm like, if you don't go to bed right now, little boy, boogeyman's going to come out of your closet. And so I was like, mommy and daddy are bosses together. Like, what's your point? And he says, I knew you were a boss. And I said, what do you mean that you knew I was a boss? And he says, at work, you're a boss and you tell people what to do. And at home, you're the boss because you tell me and Lincoln what to do. And so I had to check myself and say, your own flesh and blood, your son sees his father as a boss and not as dad. I have a problem with that. So I had to check myself and say, as a father, you're not leading as a father, you're leading as a director of a nonprofit in your own home. And I was led in this thought process of, in this framework that I use called wear the right hat, right? When I go home, I need to take the director hat off and I need to put father hat on. I need to put husband hat on. So this is what hat stands for. How do I handle what I hear? How do I give attention with the right attitude? And then how do I transform the temperature? So how do I handle what I hear? When my son needs me to be dad, I need to be kid-like. I need to be loving. Do I need to be protector? Yes, but I also need to be loving and nurturing, teach him how to do all these things, right? Give attention with the right attitude. What happened at work shouldn't happen at home, right? The stresses at work should not follow you home, and the stresses at home shouldn't follow you to work. Like, I need to leave those at the door. And then how do I transform the temperature? If my son is sad, how do I make him happy? If he's happy, how do I make him phenomenal, right? If my wife is stressed, how do I bring calmness to her? So before I go into any room, before I go into any meeting, before I go into any conversation, how do I take a second and not breathe to bring your heart rate down necessarily, but how do I just pause? Who does the person on this other side of this door need me to be? Because right now I have this hat on, and visually, physically, like I seriously still do this. I'll be in my garage, outside of the door before I go inside the house, and I'll do this. And it's not to like wipe sweat off of my bald head, right? It's literally taking this hat on and thinking, and literally close my eyes and take a deep breath and say, who does my wife need me to be right now? And here's the other part. Who does Levi need me to be right now? Who does Lincoln need me to be right now? And who does Jackson need me to be right now? My three boys. Because as a father and as a leader of any organization, stop leading everyone the same way that you lead everyone. Everyone takes individual leadership. The way I lead my wife is going to be different than the way I lead my boys. How I lead Levi is going to be completely different than I lead Lincoln. Lincoln is a middle child. And for all you listeners that are a middle child, we all know that you're weird. Just kidding. We all know that you have issues. Just kidding again. Middle children are just different, if you will. And so because I acknowledge how special my son is in that case, my direction for him or my leadership for him is completely different than my oldest and my youngest. Same thing with my employees. And so employees, I'm going to treat them based on their strengths, right? Based on their personality and based on what they're currently going through. So the best way or the best outcome of being led was by someone who I didn't even see as a leader. Definitely led me to be the person who I needed to be for him and for everybody else moving forward.
I love how unconventional that answer was. But it's such a great story. And I think there's so many little occurrences of leadership the world over every minute of every day that are exactly that. It's leadership being displayed by someone who isn't in a leadership role necessarily, who you wouldn't have expected to be a leader in that situation or at all. And yet quite often they have the most impact. And it's a lovely story. And not being a parent myself, I'm very confident in saying everyone knows the best children are the eldest children.
I would have to respectfully disagree. I'm the youngest of two.
Oh, no. Yeah. Oh, you get on really well with my brother.
Isn't it funny that, like, again, it goes into like just the psychology of things of like how firstborns are, middle children, how youngest. And I don't know, I would love to read more on that side note, but like people that have like 5, 6, 8 children, like, is there a middle child or is there middle children? And is there like the oldest is there the oldest or the eldest, of the group? It is interesting on more than, because for my immediate family and then my current family now, right? I'm the youngest of 3 and then I have 3 boys. So what that looks like, I'm trying to see how my boys resemble my 2 sisters and myself. Like, where does Jackson and I line up? Where does Lincoln and my sister line up? And then Levi and my eldest sister, which is funny because the godparents of my children, my oldest sister is the godmother to my oldest. My sister, the middle child, is the godparent to my middle son, and then an uncle of mine is the godfather to my youngest. But yeah, I couldn't be the godfather to my own son to keep it going. But yeah,
was that deliberately planned? The alignment.
Now that I think about it, no,
to mix it up.
It wasn't. It wasn't at all planned that way. But it's just funny how that worked out. Must have
been subconscious.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, there must be research on that sort of thing, though. I bet if we looked, we could find it.
For sure. For sure.
All right. This is the time travel question. So if you could go back in time, way back to the beginning of your career, maybe like the day one of your first job, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, man. Man, it's almost not fair. Because I'm thinking about my first job, and to me, like, my first job didn't matter. To me, I used to, I bust tables for a Mexican restaurant, and I just bust tables, dishwasher, and stuff like that. I would go back to the intentionality piece. No matter what job I had, like, you saw your job for a paycheck, and it wasn't about the paycheck; it was about the people. Jim Rohn has a great saying that says, "You don't get paid per hour; you get paid by the value you bring to that hour." And so if I would have just known that then, I think the customer service would have been different. The conversations that I had with the boss at that time would have been completely different. Like, if I think about it now, if I had the thought process that I have now, my thought process would be, how could I multiply this restaurant? How can I become the owner when she leaves? Like, my job is to take your job. So yeah.
It's a great quote, that one. Definitely.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think for me, that's one of the really good ways of describing the difference between a leader and a boss as well, is how they view the people working for them, whether they are, I'm just paying for your time, you'll be here 9 to 5 or whatever, versus I'm paying you because you deliver all this value to my organization.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, so the last question then it's usually my favorite one. I get some really interesting answers to this, and usually much more interesting explanations compared to answers, if that makes sense. So it's called Leadership Heroes. And the question is, if you had to pick one person, they could be anyone you like, they could be alive, dead, past, present, real, fictional, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Who embodies leadership? Oh, man. I have two. I think when you think of leadership, for me at least, you automatically think about John Maxwell. I think he's synonymous with leadership. I think there's other people, Simon Sinek and all these other people, but I think John Maxwell has done it for so long and at a high level. But if I can, whether you believe in him or not, I would say Jesus Christ. Like, here's the cool thing about this, and here's the reason why, is if you even read the stories of his life, he always gave people what they wanted and then gave them what they needed, right? I need healing. Cool, I'll give you that. But what you really need, that's what you want. But what you need is grace. What you need is forgiveness. And I'm here for that, right? The story of him being betrayed, right? When Judas betrayed him, in the words that he used was, "Come and do what you came to do, friend," and gave him a hug. The person is going to throw him under the bus to die, and he calls the dude friend. How awesome is that? And whether you believe in those stories or not, just take the lesson from that. The person that is basically throwing stones at you, who wants you to die, still call him friend. Like, that's insane to me. I don't know that I can ever live to that expectation. However, it makes me check myself and my leadership to say, hey, somebody did something wrong, but here's the key. Just because they failed doesn't make them a failure. And just because they made a mistake does not make them a mistake. The reason why us in leadership are put in the position to help people out and why you're having that conversation with that person at that given time is, I feel, the universe, God, whatever you believe in, you are the perfect person to help them in their imperfect situation. So how do I have grace? How do I have a leadership thought process, the intentionality to help this person become better and grow? Now, don't get me wrong. There's people who need to be written up. There's people who need to be fired and let go. But there's got to be a process. And there's some stuff that's automatic, right? You stole all this stuff. Policy says I have to fire you, right? But when somebody messes up on an account or whatever, hey, come on. You and I both have something in common. You've messed up and I've messed up. And we're still here and we're still alive and we're still breathing. Let's figure out how we can make this better. And I just think if I was to get the leadership from both of those people, characters, whatever you want to think of them as, like, you can make a pretty darn leader just by following some of those lessons.
Yeah, I think so as well. I'm sorry to say we've had that choice before. Quite a popular one, actually. So you don't get bonus points.
Yeah.
Bad luck.
Yeah.
Jesus is a particularly good choice. And I agree with you. Whether you believe in him or not, there are lessons in the stories. And I think he's always stood out to me in those stories, in the belief system, as quite a brilliant example, actually, of servant leadership. Mm-hmm. And obviously we didn't have the concept until relatively recently in human history, but applying it backwards, that's clearly what it was. He was always putting his people first before his own best interests, even. And there's not many, even people who call themselves servant leaders, who do that every day to such effect and with such impact, which is obviously why he's chosen so regularly when I ask this question. Right. But I think it's about it's what you said, is giving people grace. I think that is such a powerful lesson as well. And it's something, even when the extremist thing has happened, someone has done something wrong, something bad even, doesn't necessarily automatically mean they're a bad person. They might have just had a bad day. But particularly in this kind of modern age where everything's so polarized and controversial and there's so much conflict, even in our just office politics of it even. Yeah. It's so easy to just jump to, did something I disagree with, hate them. Right. And I think as leaders, we need to disconnect those two things. That shouldn't be the automatic response. It should be more into leaning into the curiosity side of it, asking the questions, seeing Absolutely. if you can support with them, if you can build up that working relationship, repair it so there is still a future. Obviously, unless they have stolen something, you don't have a choice. You got to show them the door. But
there was a statement that pushed me from John Maxwell. I was like, I don't agree with this. And then after I marinated, marinated on it for quite some time. About 6 months later, I was like, oh, this totally makes sense, because I wasn't in the mental capacity to understand. And so, I pushed it away. But here's the main part: is I was open to continuously learning. So the statement that John Maxwell said was, as leaders, we should constantly, so that was the part that bothered me at first, we should constantly, here's the next part, contradict ourselves. And I was like, I don't know that I want to follow a leader who contradicts himself. Right? Because one of those 4 things that everybody wants in their leader is to be competent. You're not very competent if you're constantly contradicting yourself. But here's the lesson, right? I didn't agree with it. So kind of like we just talked about, if you don't agree with the whole Jesus thing, then cool, but take the lesson out of it. I didn't agree with it, but I was like, okay, let me take the lesson out of it. And then that's when my eyes opened up, right? And I thought, okay, here's something. I was spanked as a child. I think it was the best thing that helped me become a better kid in following directions. I, as a father, spanked my sons up to a certain point, and I realized, wait a minute, if as a kid you didn't like this, then why are you doing it to your own kids? Like, there's a better way to do this. So months prior, I was like, yeah, if your kid, if it's in the sense deserved or warranted, right? Don't touch that. They touch it. No, don't do that. Or, hey, I told you, an open hand on the butt, like that's legal, right? You're not beating your child, but a spanking, that's okay. And then the kid's not, 1 month old and you're spanking him for crying, right? No, don't do that. That's called child abuse. You should be arrested, right? But it's like, kids 5 or 6 years old. Hey, we told you that. Did you do it? Yes. On the bottom, right? I did it for about 2 months, if that. And then I was like, there's a way better way to do this. I literally contradicted my belief system in this was the best way. What was best for you is best for your kid. I'm thinking, no, it wasn't. In leadership, it was always, hey, military, this is the position on the totem pole. It's yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sergeant, no, sergeant. You're here, you do whatever they say. But what if it goes against policy, procedure, it goes against belief systems, it goes against, you can. So then I learned you can still say no and you can still love through discipline. I can still honor you by being honest with you. So I can disagree with you. I just have to do it honorably by being honest with you. And so then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm contradicting myself. And here's the reason why you contradict yourself is because you're growing and evolving as a leader. What I used to believe was right is not the best way. I think John Maxwell also says, every idea is a good idea until you get the best idea. So yeah, it might have been a good idea, but right now it's not the best idea. This is. And so I'm going to change my thought process on those things. And so, yeah, I think that's a big thing to where I'm getting to is what you were saying is we can have different thoughts. We can have different beliefs, and that's okay. This is what makes countries and people great is you've caused me to think, and I might have caused you to think. I might not believe it, but I'm just thinking just a little bit. And it's okay to have differences. I think sports shows this the best. You can love one soccer team, have a best friend or family member or spouse for that matter, like the rival team, but on game day, don't talk to me. And if I win, I'm going to rub it in your face. And if I lose, I'm going to throw the biggest, pity party ever. And I don't want to hear it. I'm going to lock myself in my room. You know what? We still love each other at the end of the day. Our relationship with each other is way more important than a team that we don't even play for, right? Like we're not getting checks from them, but here's the thing is like, sometimes we are that excited about our beliefs and we're that excited about those hard lines, that foundation. But it's okay to disagree. It's okay. And not you're done. Bye. See you. Unfollow. Don't talk to me anymore. Right. Because then what does that say about you?
Yeah. I mean, it's the social media of the world, isn't it? I think
for sure
has a lot to answer for, it's just open confirmation bias, isn't it? So much of the time, just like you said something I disagree with, so we're not friends anymore. I blocked you. I don't have to listen to that thing I disagree with anymore. But you're right. I mean, you miss out on so much, even in a kind of a microcosm in an organization, in a business. As the leader in that situation, you need that disagreement, because if everyone just agrees with you, if everyone just has the same point of view, the quality of the decisions, the quality of the outputs, you're not considering all of the options. And so you end up with such worse outcomes. And we talk about this quite a lot as well when diversity and inclusion and things like that come up as well. And groupthink is the other theory that's relevant here as well.
And that's even a conversation that I've had friends who are in that industry where we've had conversations. I'm like, hey, can I push you a little bit? And they're like, okay. And so this can get a little controversial for some people. I'm like, I'm just going to throw like a grenade into your thought process, and then I'm going to walk away and let you sort it out. But, when we talk about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we talk about some of that stuff, it's like, but we're excluding people when we do that, right? So there's organizations that say, hey, we all look a certain color here, right? We need to bring other people in. Well, when you bring quote unquote other people in, you're going to be excluding other people who are qualified for the position. When we talk about inclusion, right? I say, and I always go the way extreme, right? Just to make a point. I told this to a friend who does this at a school, and I said, and they're like, we want to welcome everybody to play for our sports. Like we want everyone to go out for sports. We're trying to include everybody. And so I said, okay, where do I sign up? And he's like, looks at me, and I was like, I want to play. And he's like, well, you can't. I'm like, wait, no. You talked about inclusion and you want everybody to play. And like, no, well, we only need 6th through 8th graders. It's a junior high. So you can't. And I'm like, okay, so you're excluding me. He's like, well, no, we're junior high. We're only allowed junior high players. I said, okay. So I have a guy down the street. His son is freaking amazing. What school does he go to? he goes to this other school, but I'll just have him go, no, it's only for our kids at our school. Like, oh, so you're excluding 6th and 7th and 8th graders that go to other schools. So you're not including them. Well, we only want these people. Okay, cool. So on the football field, I want you to bring on this kid, Dylan. And like, what kid, Dylan? I'm like, the kid on the wheelchair. And he's like, how are we going to do that? His wheelchair doesn't go on the grass. I'm like, sorry. So now you're going to have to bring everybody and play them on the blacktop because he's not able to play. So now what do you do with your inclusion piece? So then I'm like, okay, let's talk about the meeting that we have. If I was to come in, right, full blown opposite side of the spectrum, I'm going to come in with my, at that time, or this, let's say this time, I'm going to come in with my Trump 2024 hat, my MAGA hat on, and I'm going to come into your meeting. What are you going to tell me about my attire? You're going to tell me that I can't wear that. Why? Because it might offend somebody. So now I cannot be included. All I'm saying is that if you're going to include, if you're talking about inclusion, we must include everyone. But in inclusion, there is exclusion. Right or wrong? And he's like, I had to think about that. I'm like, that's all I wanted to do, is just get you to think a little bit differently. And so I want to give you this. Is this podcast on is it going to be visual or is it just all audio?
It will be both, yeah.
Okay. So I want to show you this thing. We have these, and I do this, we have these cups, right? You probably have them where you're from. Starbucks cups or plastic cups, and they have the straw has this notch on it. Can you see that notch right there? And have you seen these cups before? It's not like a new thing, but where does this go? Does this go inside the cup? Does that notch go inside the cup? Or does it go on the outside of the cup?
I would say on the outside to stop it falling all the way through, but then it's too long, isn't it? So I don't know.
Okay, so this is what 99.999% of people say. It goes in the bottom. Okay, it goes in the bottom because they don't want the straw to fall out. So the straw doesn't come out. So I say, if this is full, why are you walking around like this with your cup? Like if it's full, you're not going to walk around like this. It makes zero sense. But everyone puts it on the bottom. And I said, what if? So then you want to refill. And so now you got to open it up. You take your straw out. You're touching where your mouth was. We were just offline talking about COVID and sicknesses and everything else, right? You get a refill, right? And then you got to put the whole thing. But what if it goes on top? So now when you go to drink it, your straw doesn't fall out, right? And people are like, oh my gosh. So the key to this is just because that's how you've always done it, and just because that's the way you're taught, is not the way that it has to be. If it works for you, beautiful, awesome. Let it continue to work. But you can't knock somebody that's causing you to think a little bit differently, because just the way in business and in life, just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean that that's how it always has to be done that way. It could be different. And there's a story of there's a couple different stories of like a dude that fishes. He's fishing and he's catching all kinds of fish. And a gentleman next to him is like, how are you catching all these fish? And then you're throwing most of them back. He catches it. He puts it to his hand. He measures it on his hand. And if it's bigger than his hand, he throws it back in. And the guy's looking at him like, you're throwing the biggest fish back into the water. What are you doing? And the guy brings it out, and it's about the width of his hand or the size of his hand. And he keeps it. And he continues to do this all day. And he walks away with 5 fish, but he's thrown hundreds away. And so he asked the gentleman, why are you throwing those dishes? He goes, oh, I put it on the size of my hand because that's as big of a pan that I have. And I can't cook a fish that's bigger than the size of my hand. And he's like, bro. So just because you do it that way always doesn't. So with the whole diversity, inclusion, the diversity thing, it's just like, can we just talk about it? I'm not trying to change your decision. If it works, it works. The inclusion piece, if you feel that you're including people, cool. But if you think like I did with the whole spanking thing, I'm like, maybe this isn't 100%. Maybe there's a glimpse of something a little bit better. Let me just continue to think. Don't change your belief. Just think a little bit different. And I think this is what makes us great as people is I might agree or disagree with something, but I'm not going to let it lose my mind over something that I don't agree with. I just might say, And the cool thing is some of my best friends are ones that do not believe the same thing that I believe. And we have amazing conversations. And here's the key part. We're still friends at the end of the day because our relationship is so much better because we understand that that person is better than, and the relationship is more valuable than them not believing something that I believe in.
I'd probably say the same, actually. But I think there's, going back again to something you said just now, I think I'm a massive believer in this idea that anyone really, but leaders especially, has to be a lifelong learner. And if you're going to be a lifelong learner, you have to always be open to learning that you did something wrong earlier or last time or last week or last year. And if that's the case, then as Michael said, you've got to be constantly changing and contradicting yourself, because otherwise you're not learning, you're not moving forward. And ultimately you're going to be less effective as a leader, I think.
I just made a post about that this morning. I think it's Maxwell that says the day that a tree dies is the day that it stops growing. And the way I put it is, if you've had standing water, it becomes murky and it becomes gross and stinky and smelly, but flowing water is always fresh. So continue to flow and always have the process of continuously learning.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's a good way to put it, definitely. And I think as well, the reason why so many people maybe try to avoid these kind of things, it's about avoiding conflict, isn't it? I think that is something that humans are not that great at in most situations.
Yeah, and conflict is good. Think about everything that is good brings conflict. The home that you're in, there was conflict between the hammer, the nail, and the piece of wood that it went through. Mm. When you lift weights, there's conflict, there's resistance in the weight that you're lifting and what you're doing, but it makes you bigger and stronger. My relationship with my wife was what I thought was good. And she kept on pressing me one day for, and we haven't talked about this, but suffer from PTSD from my deployment. And she was pressing me like, tell me what's going on and why are you feeling this way? And what did you see? And what happened? I'm like, leave me alone. Don't talk to me about it. Don't talk to me. I have at that point have never, ever, ever raised a hand or my voice to my wife. And that day I raised my voice to my wife and I literally said, yelled at the top of my lungs, drill sergeant outside voice, leave me the F alone. And as I did it, being truly transparent, I'm turned away from her because I couldn't even see her in her eyes. I'm shaking the refrigerator handles and I pull the refrigerator handles, both of them, off the refrigerator. And I'm like, just leave me alone. That night of conflict, what I thought was conflict was the saving grace in the conversation that saved my marriage. She had said something in that bit of rage that I had was, if you can fight for our country and fight for another country and be a police officer and fight for a city and protect a city that we don't even live in, then how come you can't fight or protect our marriage and what is going on in your head? And I was like, ooh, wow, that hit hard. And the following week, I went to the VA and I seeked help and I got a counselor, got to get, that's where I got diagnosed with the PTSD and the depression and all this other stuff. But then we had a plan on working on it. And my relationship with my wife is the best it has ever been because of conflict. But here's a part of the conflict. We were seeking resolution because, again, going back to this, because the person is so much more important, right, than any maybe policy or procedure. In organizations, are policies and procedures important? Absolutely. But who's going to execute those things? People. So we need to be intentional with the people that we do. And conflict is okay. The reason why it's not okay with you is because you're not okay with it. You have to push yourself to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Bottom line.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's the comfort zone. And thank you for sharing that story. It's very personal, much. And I think it makes the point perfectly. I think that's it. The kind of the core of good leadership is it is about the people ultimately, and everything else is just the means to the end, isn't it? If the people aren't there, nothing else is going to happen anyway.
Right. And even, you know, when I've fired people and let people go or had to write them up, it's like, listen, especially with the people that I had to write up, the conversation goes something like, I am giving you these expectations and they're high because there's no doubt in my mind that you can achieve them. I know that you can achieve it. I know that. And here's the big piece that I'd say is we don't call people out. We call people up. We call the situation out. This is what happened. Again, the problem is the problem. You're not the problem. In some cases, people sometimes are the problem, right? So there's always that caveat. But for the most part, a missing deadline, coming in late, like we can work through that. The situation is a problem, but I'm not going to call you out. I'm going to call you up. And that's a huge piece. But hey, I'm giving you these high expectations because I know that you can achieve them. And I do expect a lot from you because time after time after time, you show up and you're such a good employee. Today or yesterday, we had a little bit of a hiccup. My job as your leader is to help you through those hiccups. Mess up. It's okay to mess up. We're going to take our wins, but our losses are going to be learned lessons. And I'm here to walk you through those. And people need to be okay with failing, and that's okay. And so it's having those conversations. Even when I've let people go, hey, with your strengths, is where strengths comes back into full circle. Your strengths, it looks like you would probably be better off in these places. Here's a list of the people who I think you would fit in with. Here is their number. They're hiring. I'm sorry that we have to let you go. This is your third or fourth write-up because it just doesn't match, right? It's like having in baseball, it's like having a pitcher who's great at pitching be a shortstop or a second baseman. That's not their strength, right? So why am I going to do that with somebody? Again, another analogy, different sport. In American football, right? It's like having the center that hikes the ball, a wide receiver. Dude is not fast and probably doesn't have the hands to catch the ball. Why would you put him in that position? So we hired you thinking that your strengths were going to be here and they weren't. Your strengths are probably better off here. Here are some positions, whatever. Go kill it, bro. Go get it. Email me. You have my email. Let me know how it goes. I wish you all the success. And people are like, okay, bye. See you later. And the firing goes a lot better than what people, think. Again, caveat, not all firings are going to be like that, but they can be. They can. It's your choice. Again, depending on the crime of what the person did, right? It may not equate to that, but there's always a better way.
Yeah, definitely. I think understanding the why is quite important. I mean, Simon Sinek famously made a book about all of that, but in this context, is understanding why hasn't it worked?
Yes. Well, and here's the piece to that. I love Simon Sinek. I know and I get the why part, and I agree 50% and I disagree the other 50%. And here's the reason why. Somebody else got me to think, is it about the why? A lot of times it is, but how about if you start with who? And if I start with the who and I understand their why, then the outcome is completely different. And I just love this conversation because it keeps on going in circles, right? Of thinking about the person, thinking about their strengths, thinking about their why, thinking about their purpose outside of them. And if I can get all those things in alignment, man, we have a different company, we have a different organization, we have a different leader, we have a different employee. So yes, you can start with why. I would also say you could start with who.
I agree with you. And I feel like that's sort of what he was saying. It's just, it maybe wasn't as catchy from the marketing perspective.
Right. It wasn't. It's all marketing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I more or less agree with everything you're saying about the conflict and resolving that as well. I think I would add a caveat there as well, is that, there's every now and then there'll be one of those people who hears the words conflict is good and then takes that as license to go and start arguments with everyone for no reason.
For sure. Yeah. Juan on this podcast said that conflict is good. So you're going to listen to me and you're going to like it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Juan, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great talking with you. Lovely to meet you. One last little question I'll ask you. If any of the listeners want to know more about you, perhaps get in touch. Is there a way to work with you, etc.? Where can they go to find out more?
Yeah. So if you like any of the content that I've given you so far, I have my own podcast called the Relevant Development Podcast. where I talk anything personal and professional development. Raise the Bar with the Z, RAIZE. So Raise the Bar CEO on Instagram, and LinkedIn. I think I've hyphenated it RTB. So -1 JUAN, and you can find me there on LinkedIn. And then we raise the bar, same spelling. We raisethebar.com is the website.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all of those links in the episode description so people can find it easily. And that's it. We're out of time. Thank you so much again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to the very excellent Juan Alvarado, my guest today, for his time and for sharing what were at times quite personal stories. I certainly learned plenty today, listener. I trust that you did as well. And if you do want to learn more about Juan and his work, you will find all the URLs to his website, his Instagram, LinkedIn in the description below. And I do as well encourage you to give his podcast a listen. I hope you'll be back with me again next week when we'll be hearing from human resources professional and consultant, Katie Howard, who's putting the fun back into HR fundamentals. It's going to be an engaging conversation about the crossovers and the tensions as well between HR and leadership, our two different areas of expertise. So don't miss it. And until then, have a great rest of your week and be a leader, not a boss.